whispered deep within America's darkest forests. These immersive ASMR horror stories lead you down to cursed trailheads, where silence watches and the wilderness remembers. You're listening to ASMR 404 Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I had been hiking solo for over a decade and thought I had seen every kind of wilderness weirdness you could imagine. But the Bonepath Trail in New Mexico was something else entirely. I had heard whispers about it, mostly from burnt-out survivalist forums and back-channel chatter from park rangers who drank too much on night shifts and shared what they weren't supposed to. They called it the trail that doesn't want to be found, which I always thought was a poetic way to describe overgrown, bushwhacked roots, until I actually tried to locate it myself and realized how literal that phrase really was there. Were no marked signs, not even a faded wood stake or a scratched tree, just GPS coordinates that kept shifting every time I plugged them into my offline maps. I finally had to ask an old native man at a rundown trading post, who just stared at me a long while, then slid over a hand-drawn map that smelled like smoke and sweat, and whispered, "Don't step on the stones, no matter what." That meant I didn't know. And when I asked, he only said one thing: the mountain doesn't like to be bled on so. Obviously, I parked my truck near the base of Luz Canyon and loaded up with a small pack, just the essentials I didn't plan to camp, just scout the route, and maybe return the next weekend with heavier gear. But as soon as I left the maintained trail, something changed. It was like the forest shifted, not visually, not in any Disney magical way, but in the weight of the silence. The birds went first, then the wind, like even the air decided to stay clear of that ridge about 2 miles in. I found them, the stones. They weren't natural. I don't care what any geologist says. They were shaped not by erosion or time, but by hands. Crude, maybe even broken hands, some tall, some flat, arranged in spirals that stretched out wider than a football field. I stepped over the outer ring, and everything felt wrong, like the oxygen itself had been rewound, like an old tape the air tasted. Metallic like hot pennies. I ignored it. I pushed in deeper, and then I heard the knocking. Not from a tree, not from branches or animals. It came from below. I knelt down near one of the flat slabs and pressed my ear to it, and I swear to you, I heard someone screaming far away beneath the ground, and then a second voice, screaming louder but not in fear. It sounded like rage that wasn't mine. I stood up too fast and blacked out for half a second, stumbled back, and my boot landed on one of the smaller stones, and it cracked like glass. Everything stopped: the wind, the forest, even the birds that weren't there. It was already quiet, but now it was like the world forgot sound entirely. And then the shadows got longer, but the sun was still overhead. I swear it hadn't moved. I checked my watch, and it was blinking. 0000, and I don't even own a digital watch. Mine is analog. That part still gives me chills thinking about it. Turned back the way I came, or thought I came, but there were more stones now, more rings spiraling out in a pattern that didn't make sense. It was like the geometry had rewritten itself while I was distracted. The trail behind me was gone, and when I tried to walk straight back, the trees themselves seemed to move subtly, just enough to throw me off direction, like the forest was correcting me like a living maze. And then the air started to buzz, not with insects, with something else, something deep and low and ancient. I started hearing footsteps behind me, slow, heavy, dragging feet. But when I turned around, no one was there, except now the stones were bleeding. Not metaphorically, there were actual red veins pulsing through the cracks and dripping onto the moss, and it smelled like copper and burnt bone. I screamed, but no sound came out, not a whisper, not a breath. My throat moved, but the air refused to carry anything. I dropped to my knees and tried to pray, but even my thoughts felt slow, like the trailhead was feeding on them, turning each memory into mud. That's when I saw Herod first. I thought it was a tree wrapped in moss, but then it moved. Her face was wrong, stretched like wet fabric pulled tight over a skull that was too narrow, too long, and her eyes weren't eyes. They were dark pits with something turning behind them like a slow current. And when she opened her mouth, it wasn't to speak, it was to unhinge like a snake. And inside, I saw more stone, more of those cursed shapes, spinning slowly like a vortex. And then the forest groaned, not the trees, not the wind, but the forest itself, as if it hated being watched. I ran in a direction I hoped was downhill. I didn't stop to breathe or scream or think, just moved until I hit the edge of a cliff. I don't remember there being a cliff on the topo maps, but this one looked bottomless, not black, but void, like the world simply ended there. And from below came the knocking, again louder, this time rhythmic like a heartbeat. And I felt something huge wake up beneath the soil like the stones were teeth, and I had just stepped into the mouth of something older than language. I didn't jump, but I swear something pushed me, not hard, just enough to fall forward. But instead of falling, I hit ground, flat, as if the cliff was never there. And the trail was back under my feet, but twisted, looped back into itself, like a spiral. And the trees were watching. I mean, actually turning their trunks like sentinels, shifting ever so slightly to face me with beat step. And then I saw the sign's wooden posts, blank at first, then etched as I passed, each one symbols that burned themselves into the grain. No language, just patterns that made my nose bleed and my vision flicker. And then I saw the old man from the trading post standing at the end of the trail, holding a lantern made of bone and whispering something in a tongue I didn't know, but understood deep down. And he said, "You stepped where blood should never land, and now you're marked. You'll never truly leave." When I woke up, I was back in my truck door. Open engine off. No tracks, no signs of how I got there. My gear untouched, except my boots were gone, and my left foot had something carved into the skin. A spiral with teeth, and every night since then I've heard the knocking, sometimes from under my bed, sometimes from the forest outside my window. Even when I'm hundreds of miles from New Mexico, it follows me. Go looking for the Bonepath trail, it'll find you, and it won't let go. I thought the Bonepath trail was the end of it, that the horror would root itself in that cursed stretch of New Mexico and eventually wear thin like a scar on old skin. But something followed me. It didn't come all at once. No dramatic arrival. No thunder cracking the sky. Just little shifts like shadows, where light should fall, or the sound of breathing when no one was home, and dreams soaked in soil and fire, and eyes that blinked sideways, like something underwater was trying to remember my face. I kept hiking anyway, maybe out of defiance, maybe because I thought if I stayed away from the trails, they'd win whatever they were. But then I got the invitation to lead a 3-day backcountry expedition up at Redwood Divide, California's northern wilderness, vast, ancient, untouched. I told myself this was a reset, clean slate, clean air, trees older than history maybe. The last place untouched by whatever had followed me. There were 8 of us, 2 seasoned guides, 3 college students on a credit-earning survival course, a couple from Oregon doing some kind of grief recovery thing, and a kid named Miles who shouldn't have been there. He was too quiet, too twitchy, said he liked sleeping under trees because they remembered your breath at night and held it when you left. I asked him once if he'd hiked before, and he just stared past me like he was watching something move behind my shoulders. The first day was fine, textbook, even clear skies, light elevation. Perfect campsite, nestled in a grove of old-growth redwoods, the kind that made you feel like an ant in a cathedral. But something was wrong that night. The fire didn't want to burn the logs, hissed even when dry, and the smoke curled down instead. Bub, like the sky was pushing it back. Then came the smell, sulfur and rot, faint, but enough to make the students gag. One blamed a dead animal nearby, but we couldn't find the source. Miles didn't sleep. He just sat outside his tent, staring into the forest, not scared, not curious, just calm, like he was waiting for something. And around 3 a.m. he started whispering. I thought he was talking in his sleep, until I realized the words weren't his. They were older than him, deeper like stone, grinding against bone. And then I heard a reply, not from our camp, not from any of us, but from the trees. A low moan like wood cracking in winter, only it didn't echo. It swallowed the sound. Hold that. Next morning, one of the students was missing. Her boots were still inside the tent, but the flap was wide open, and her sleeping bag was soaked with mud. Not wet like rain, but thick black mud that reeked of minerals and age. We followed the tracks for about 200 feet before they just ended, not faded, not washed out, just gone. Like she was lifted off the ground and carried into the canopy, but the branches above were undisturbed. No leaves broken, no nests shifted. We voted to head back, but the trail was different, longer, steeper. And the sun didn't move. Normally, it hung low, like late afternoon, even as our watches crept past noon. And every now and then, we'd hear the sound of breathing behind us, just at the edge of hearing, like the forest was echoing someone who wasn't there. Miles said we were inside the root now, that the trees had folded inward to keep us close, and that they liked the taste of new people by. The second night, we were too tired to walk anymore, and set camp near a cold creek that ran uphill. Not joking, it actually flowed against gravity, and we drank from it anyway because our bottles were nearly dry and the filters were useless against whatever made the water hum. When we touched it, I woke up twice that night to the sound of chewing. Not animals, not humans. Something wet and slow and satisfied, and in the morning another person was gone. The woman from Oregon, her husband, just sat there, slack-jawed, eyes rolled white, muttering. I saw her peel herself off and walk into the bar. Like it was a door. I tried to call for extraction, but there was no signal, not even static, just a dead scream. And when I turned it off, my reflection stayed for a half-second longer than my face moved. And in that frozen moment, it smiled at me. The path home didn't exist anymore. Our GPS just spun in slow circles like it was drunk, and the trees grew closer together, tighter, more human-shaped. One even had fingernails in the knots. Another had a face that looked like the missing student only. Stretched wrong, like someone poured her soul into wood that couldn't quite hold it. And Miles said they were growing new ones for the forest's memory, that we were the seeds on. The third night, the forest spoke not with words, not even with sounds. Just understanding, like an invasive thought pressed against your skull until your own ideas bent around it, and the message was simple: stay and be. Remembered or leave and forget, and no one wanted to forget. We tried to burn a tree to mark a direction, but the bark bled black smoke, and the flames turned blue and hissed like snakes, and then the redwoods began to hum low and deep and ancient, like the planet was groaning from inside. One of the college kids ran into the dark, just snapped and bolted, and we never saw her again. But the next morning, the tree she ran past had something new growing out of it, a branch that bent like her spine, and bark that curled like her curly red hair, and Miles sat beneath it, singing in a language that made the forest lean closer. We didn't leave the way we came back. We didn't walk out, we were given back. I remember blinking and suddenly being at the ranger station. 6 of us, down to 3. My shirt soaked in cold sweat, and dirt packed into every crease of my skin, like I had been buried and dug out. And the ranger just nodded without asking questions, handed us cocoa and said, "You're lucky. The divide gave you up. Not everyone comes back whole." And when I asked what that meant, he just looked at the woods behind us and said, "Next time leave offerings." But I've been different ever since. My sleep doesn't stay still. I wake up in corners. I didn't fall asleep and my hair smells like cedar, even after washing. And sometimes I catch glimpses. Bios in crowds, not older, not changed, just watching from behind someone or through glass. And I know he never left the trees, liked him too much. And every trail I walk now feels like it's watching me, not in fear, not in malice, just interest. Like it's waiting for me to bring someone you didn't ever camp at Redwood Divide, unless you want the forest to remember your bones. You'd think I'd stop by now, that I'd hang up my boots, toss my packs and maps and compass into the garage, and never look at another trail again. But that's not how this works. Once you've stepped into the mouth of the wild and heard it swallow, once you've seen the forest blink, once you've felt the dirt rise like breath under your feet, you know it's already in you. It changes your blood, it shifts the way your shadow falls, and worst of all, it listens even when you sleep. Especially when you sleep. I tried to stay in cities. I really did moved into a cramped studio in Reno. 3rd floor, no view, just rooftops and cables, and still. I'd wake up with pine needles in my bed, or black moss beneath my nails. I stopped dreaming in color, started dreaming in texture, bark and root and skin that wasn't mine. Dreams that smelled like smoke and ash and the cold, wet smell of rock walls 100 feet underground, and always the sound of knocking far, far away, like something was still trying to finish a rhythm. It started years ago. Hadn't planned to go to Wyoming, not really, but I got a call from a guy I used to work wilderness SAR with back before things got weird with the Bonepath and the divide. He said they needed someone off-book, someone who wouldn't ask questions, someone who'd seen things and not run. And I didn't ask much, because part of me was hoping it would be bad, hoping whatever waited out there would finally finish the job, or at least show. Tell me why it hadn't. Trailhead wasn't marked, not even unofficially. No ribbons, no cairns, no GPS. Just a stretch of tree line in the Bighorn Mountains, where compasses twitch and cell signals die, and voices sound like they're coming from water, even when they're not. The locals call it the crawl space, not because of the terrain, but because people who go in either crawl back out or don't come back at all. 3 disappearances in 5 weeks. No signs, no camps left behind, no gear scattered or torn, just nothing, like they blinked out of space. I met the lead ranger in a shack that looked more like a storm shelter than a station. He didn't shake my hand, didn't smile, just said, "This place remembers what's walked through it, and right now it's hungry." We hiked in light gear, silent air, thick and still, like the forest was holding its breath. We passed a ring of birch trees with scorch marks. Halfway up their trunks, not burned by fire, but by heat that moved sideways, and I kept feeling like I was walking in a circle, even when my steps were straight and deliberate. We made camp on a ridge above a valley that wasn't on any topographical map, not flat, not sharp, just wrong angles that hurt your eyes if you looked too. Long shadows that didn't point the right way, and sounds that had no source. A low clicking like claws on slate, and then a groan like the earth beneath us was shifting in its sleep. Around midnight, I saw lights moving through the trees, not flashlights, not lanterns, too smooth, too slow, like orbs sliding on oil. And they didn't bounce or waver, they just hovered, then pulsed and vanished like a breath sucked back into the dirt. I asked the ranger if he saw them, and he just nodded once, then said, "Dig." We dug with our hands just beside the fire pit, about 6 inches down. The dirt changed. It got wet, dense, not muddy, but fleshy, like peat soaked in something old. And when I pulled up the first object, I thought it was a stick, until I saw the carvings. Small teeth carved into bone in a spiral, and the ranger whispered, "It's the Kibi 4." I could ask. He pressed his palm against the object, and his eyes rolled back, and he dropped like a stone. No twitching, no gasping, just still. I turned to check. Was pulse, and that's when the ground opened, not with a crack, not like an earthquake, more like skin parting beneath a knife, clean and silent, and beneath us was a staircase, not made of wood or stone, but of rib bones and jaw fragments and vertebrae. packed so tight they groaned with every shift, and down below I saw light, not bright, not warm. Just a dull throb like a heart struggling to beat through. Rockeye should have run, should have dragged him out, but I climbed down because I had to, because every nightmare, every whisper, every knock had led to this place, and I needed to know why the deeper. I went, the less sound made sense. My own breath echoed like thunder, but the creaks and groans of the bone stairs sounded like whispers near my ear. And the walls were slick, not with moisture, but with memory. I don't know how else to explain it. They pulsed images into my mind, not visions, not dreams, just memories that weren't mine. Old things, primal things, birth in dirt, death in roots trees, fed by blood children shaped in bark and teeth and silent sigh. Found the others, the missing hikers. But they weren't missing, they were growing fused. Into the walls their faces stretched long, and blind mouths open, but not screaming, just breathing slow, like they were asleep. And the deeper I went, the more of them I saw, arms reaching from the marrow floor torsos, twisted into new shapes like the forest was sculpting something from them. And then I saw the ranger again, standing in the center of it all with no eyes, just hollow sockets filled with writhing roots. And he said, "The forest is not a place, it's a mouth, and you've fed it too much to leave clean-eyed." Ran back up the stairs, or tried to, but they weren't, they're not anymore. Just a slope of wet bone that moved like muscle, and every step I took was swallowed again behind me. And the walls whispered names, not mine, not his, but yours, the names of people I hadn't thought about in years, neighbors, teachers, old friends, long dead. And I knew then that the trail wasn't in the mountains, it wasn't in the forest, it was under everything, and it was waking up high. Don't remember getting out, I just remember waking up in a ditch 20 miles from the trailhead, my boots gone. Again, my hands stained with that same dark mud, and my tongue sore like I'd bitten through it, and the ranger's pack was beside me, full of carved bones, each one shaped like a tooth, and when I tried to burn them, the fire wouldn't start it. Hissed and spat, and the shadows got longer, and I knew I had to keep them. I still have them wrapped in cloth, buried deep in a steel lockbox, under concrete, under salt. But they hum when I sleep, and I see places that don't exist on any map trails, that twist through cities and basements and inside. Houses you've never left, and always at the end. There's something waiting, something with your voice and no eyes and teeth made of stone soul. If you ever find a trail that doesn't look right, your compass spins. When the wind stops, if you hear knocking where no one walks, turn around, run if you can, because the trail doesn't care who you are, it only cares how you taste when it remembers you. I didn't want to guide that final trip out to Redwood Divide. Something about it had been clawing at my chest since the permits were issued. The air around that place always felt heavier, like the forest was watching, not with eyes, but with memory. Like it remembered what people had done there, and it didn't forgive. The request came in late season. A private expedition, 3 nights out, past the mapped trails, just north of Trinity County, deep into the Bighorn sector of the Northern California wilderness, No GPS, no cell reception, just topo maps and instincts, and a forest older than everything you love there. Group was small, which I liked, to filmmakers researching an old folk tale, a botanist studying redwood decay cycles, and a woman named Sasha who never gave a reason for joining. She didn't carry a camera or a journal or any gear really, just stared too long at things and stood too still when the wind blew her eyes. Never blinked right. I should have questioned it more, but my head wasn't clear, not since the divide had started showing up in my dreams long before this trip was ever booked. We set out, early fog curling through the trees in slow ropes like fingers. The first 5 miles were familiar marked trails through towering giants, the kind of redwoods that make you feel like the earth is still sacred but past mile marker 6. The landscape changed subtly. Trees leaned in the same direction, like they'd all shifted during some forgotten windstorm, and the ground dipped down into a shallow valley that none of the maps had marked, not even the older topographic prints I carry for backup. And I knew then we'd already crossed into the place the forest doesn't want people to name. We made camp at the edge of the hollow, and the first night was fine. No strange noises, no missing gears. Just a quiet that felt too deliberate, like the forest was waiting for us to sleep. The fire burned low, no matter how much wood we fed it, and I caught Sasha watching the flame, with her head tilted like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. Around midnight, I thought, I saw someone standing between the trees across the creek, a tall silhouette with arms too long to belong to any of us. And when I shined my headlamp that way, there was nothing there, just the sound of something breathing deep and slow, like the soil was exhaling. The second day, we pushed deeper against my better judgment, and the trail vanished, not faded, not overgrown, just gone. The dirt was soft, black and moist with decay, and the trees seemed taller somehow, like they'd grown overnight. I asked the group if they noticed anything strange, and no one answered. Sasha just smiled and kept walking ahead. No compass, no direction, just forward. And the others followed, like she was tethering them with invisible strings. We found a clearing that evening with a perfect ring of trees. Not a leaf out of place, and not a single animal sound, not even insects. The center of the clearing was cold, unnaturally cold, like stepping into a cave beneath the earth. The botanist started whispering about how the trees were too uniform to genetically similar, like they'd all sprouted from one root system. And that's when Sasha said one word: breathe. Back. And every tree in that circle flexed at once, their bark pulsing like lungs, drawing air through their knots and hollows. That night, the filmmakers disappeared. No sounds, no struggle, their tent still zipped from the inside, sleeping bags still warm, cameras still rolling, batteries drained by morning like something fed on their power. The forest felt thicker that day, not physically but spiritually, like every step took more than it gave. And the paths looped in impossible patterns, the same Moscow stump appearing 3 times. Even though we never turned, I carved a mark into a tree to test it. And when we came back around, the bark was bleeding like it had been wounded, not cut, and the mark was gone, swallowed whole by the grain. Sasha never looked concerned, never broke pace, just said, they're not lost, they've been remembered. And that's when I started noticing the bark faces, small, warped, human-like shapes bulging from the sides of trees, open mouths in silent screams, eyes stretched, wide and wet with sap. Some looked like the filmmakers, others like strangers I'd never met, and one of them looked like me. At night, I tried to run-packed my gear in silence, waited until the others were asleep and slipped out into the fog, but the trail wouldn't let me leave. Every step I took brought me closer to the same clearing, no matter how. I moved, and the trees grew louder in their breathing, echoing in my skull in rhythm with my own pulse, until I felt like I was walking through the lungs of something alive and ancient and starving. When I returned to camp, Sasha was awake, sitting at the fire which burned without fuel now, just a column of cold flame, and she said, "You're part of it now. We all are. The forest needs memory. It needs story, and yours fits just right." Then she placed her hand on the ground, and the earth opened beneath her, like paper folding back, revealing a staircase of roots and rot and redwood bones, and she walked down without a word, disappearing into the hollow beneath. You see, haven't seen her since I don't know how I got out. Woke up 2 days later, face down at the edge of the trailhead, with my pack untouched and my boots laced clean, but my journal filled with pages I don't remember. Writing pages that hum when I read them, pages written in a language I can only understand. In dreams, Redwood Divide doesn't kill you, it remembers you, and one day it calls you back. I didn't tell anyone what really happened out there, not the rangers, not the search teams, not even the other guides back at base, who gave me that look like they knew something had shifted behind my eyes, the way you look at someone who's been underwater too long and brought back something wet and breathing in their lungs. I lied, said the hikers wandered off, said the storm threw off our bearings, said I slipped on moss and hit my head, which might be true, depending on which memory I believe. More the one with footsteps in the sky, or the one where trees whisper names. I've never spoken aloud, but the forest didn't let go. Not really, not completely, because 2 weeks later, I found something on my front porch that shouldn't exist. A small sliver of bark shaped like a hand, thin fingers curled tight and pulsing faintly, like it remembered holding something, and etched across the palm in soft gray lines was my own name. Not just first and last, but my full name, the way only government records or a parent's warning would say it. And when I picked it up, I heard that breathing again, faint and wet and patient. I started dreaming of the clearing again, not like before, not flashes, not noise, but full hours spent walking in loops through that perfect circle of trees, Sasha always waiting in the center. Always barefoot, always smiling too wide and saying, "Come deeper, the story needs your bones," and every time I tried to scream, I tasted dirt and copper, like my throat had been replaced with soil. I started walking at night, couldn't help it. My legs moved on their own, past the city limits, through empty trails, behind gas stations and abandoned visitor centers, following deer tracks that never turned or paused, just straight lines, into fog and cold. And the deeper I went, the more the world began to bend. Telephone poles leaned away from me, power lines hummed too loud, and I saw my own reflection in puddles, walking behind me instead of ahead. Then I got the letter no return address. No stamp, just left tucked inside my truck windshield. A map, hand-drawn, marked with a single red X labeled home, and underneath, scrawled in the corner, in that same soft grey linework that had burned itself into the bark, was a sentence that didn't belong to any language I knew, but I could still read it. It said, "The story is ready to finish itself." So I went back, not out of bravery, not out of curiosity, out of pull, like a muscle memory, stronger than sense, the kind of instinct you don't question. Because you've already been claimed, I packed nothing, brought no compass, no water, no blade. Just walked into the tree line and let the path choose me, and it did. The air grew cold again. The birds went silent again, and the sky lost its color like the forest decided it preferred grayscale. And I walked for hours or minutes or years until I saw the clearing again, but this time the trees were different. They'd grown faces, more of them, some new, some old, some looking like me, not just once, but again and again, different expressions, different moments, like the forest had memorized every version of my fear and carved it into bark to keep, and Sasha was there waiting beneath the fire that didn't burn, still barefoot, still smiling, and she said, "You're back late, but not too late." And behind her the earth split open again, but slower this time, like it wanted me to see what was waiting. I saw roots shaped like ribs, and ribs shaped like hallways, and hallways filled with fog that whispered memories in my own voice, things I'd forgotten, saying dreams I didn't know I had, regrets I'd buried so deep they bled to remember. And Sasha stepped aside and said, "Every trailhead leads here. Eventually, this is where they all connect beneath. By the maps, beneath the soil, beneath the bones. And your story fits perfectly between the ones we've already planted." And then I saw them. The others, the filmmakers, the botanist, even the ones from stories I hadn't lived yet, faces I hadn't met yet, all standing in rows along the path, their eyes wide and blank, their mouths open, not in terror, but in awe, like they'd seen something they couldn't stop worshipping. And behind them, the trees moved with them, breathing with them, feeding off them. And I knew the redwoods weren't trees at all. Not really, they were veins, ancient and slow, pumping memory into the land, keeping the divide alive by swallowing every story it could digest. I tried to run again, but the forest didn't resist this time. It let me leave like it knew I'd come back again, like it didn't need to chase what it already owned. And I woke up at the edge of the ridge, covered in sap and dirt, and someone else's footprints leading away from my body footprints. Followed for a mile before they vanished into a pool of still water, where I saw my reflection smile without my face. Moving now, I see the divide in windows, in mirrors, in shadows. Stretched too long, and the knock returns every night, not on wood, not on walls, but in my chest, like something buried beneath me once out. And every time I walk near a redwood now, the bark pulses warm and familiar, and I swear I hear Sasha whispering, "The forest never forgets what it tasted. You can leave Redwood divide. You won't stay Gombe, 'cause once the story has your name, never stops reading." I've stopped trusting my memories, not because they fade, but because they change. Sometimes I close my eyes and remember climbing out of that forest, crawling on my hands and knees, with breath burning my lungs, and dirt packed beneath every fingernail. And sometimes I remember never leaving, standing in the same clearing, with roots curling around my legs, and Sasha whispering stories into my spine, until I couldn't tell which ones were mine and which ones were the 404 redwoods. Don't let you forget, they don't just grow upward, they grow inward. Their roots are memory, and memory is flesh, and I'm starting to think the soil beneath that clearing is made of people's stories. Lives swallowed whole and pressed into the root system, by like pages in a book too sacred to burn now. Started hearing them again, the voices, not loud, not cruel, just constant like someone breathing. Just behind the wall of sound, like the forest had followed me home and unwrapped itself beneath my floorboards. And every time I stepped out of bed, I felt the grain of wood flex like something remembered my weight. I moved to the desert, thought maybe if I stayed somewhere trees couldn't grow, I'd be free, but the dreams followed and the knocking got louder. And I found a single redwood seed on my porch every morning, even after. I paved the ground and scattered salt and built iron fences, and then one night I fell asleep in a room with no windows and woke up back in the clearing, dirt in my mouth, and a heartbeat in the ground beneath me. Sasha was there again, standing at the edge of the hole where the forest breathes her hair longer, her skin darker like bark. And she said the story is nearly done, but not finished, not without your ending. And behind her I saw rows of people I once knew, all standing still, their eyes blank, their chests open and filled with roots, and their mouths whispering things. I used to believe she held out her hand, and I took it not because I wanted to, but because I already had the choice, had already been made the first time. I stepped into that place and ignored the signs, ignored the cold, ignored the silence that was never truly empty. We descended together this time, not falling, not walking, just sinking. Like the forest had exhaled, and we rode its breath down into the oldest part, where the roots pulsed with old blood, and the air tasted like copper and pine, and every surface was soft, like skin stretched over stone sheet. Showed me the library. It wasn't a place, not in the way you think. It was a space between things, where the roots held faces, the bark held screams, and the branches held voices, all telling their story at once. And the forest listened, not like a reader listens, but like something hungry listens, something that only feeds on meaning and memory and repetitions. Showed me the others, the guides, the hikers, the rangers, the children. The old, the ones who stayed too long, and the ones who stayed just long enough to never be the same. And they were all inside the trees, their voices drifting like wind through the canopy. And I could feel them, waiting, watching, hoping I'd say the words they needed to escape, or maybe to stay. I couldn't tell which. Then she brought me to the center. It wasn't a tree, it was a mouth wide and jagged, filled with roots and memory and warmth. And when I stepped inside, I didn't feel pain. I felt understanding, the kind that breaks your ribs and remakes your heart into something quieter. Something that remembers every step you ever took, and why you took it, and every lie you told yourself to make it seem worth it. Tanned. Inside that mouth, I saw the truth that Redwood Divide isn't a place. It's a hunger memory engine built on blood. And bark, it doesn't take people. It takes their meaning, their past, their shape, and rewrites them into the root system. And when the trees grow, they don't just grow wood. They grow versions of the ones they've consumed, twisted replicas, echoing their last thoughts, their final fears, their unfinished stories, and the forest watches those replicas live out new endings over and over until it finds the one that satisfies the story enough to let it rest. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing at the trailhead, back where it all started. No gear, no pack, just the same cracked boots and a name carved into my chest, not bleeding, not scarred, just there, pressed into the skin by something ancient and deliberate. Looked behind me and saw nothing but fog, and when I breathed out, I saw bark dust in the air, like I'd been breathing in trees for days, and now they were breathing back. I never went back, not physically, but I hear the divide in every forest I enter now, in every grove, in every wind that doesn't follow the rules, in every moment where the shadows bend wrong and the birds go silent and the trees start to lean just a little too close. Here, Sasha, when I sleep, she's not angry, she's patient, because stories don't die, they grow, and every trailhead is another mouth waiting to taste your ending.